Welcome to Season 6 of Far Reach Voyages, where we share our love of offshore sailing and adventure travel. This episode is all about varnishing exterior wood, especially for the offshore boat, which generally endures more strenuous environmental conditions than other boats. There are a lot of strong opinions about varnishing. There are also a lot of sailors with far more varnishing experience than me. So what I'll share in the next 30 minutes is a summary of what I've learned and what works for me. Maintaining an exterior varnished wood is work. There's no way around it. If the kind of work it takes to produce and maintain a quality finish doesn't appeal to you, then by all means don't do it. There's no right or wrong here. It's just a choice. I enjoy varnishing. I especially enjoy the results. It brings me pleasure when I'm on the boat. This is not a video about other bright work options, which are easier to apply and maintain. So if those options meet your needs and you're happy with them, then by all means carry on. Most of the exterior varnish we do takes place with the boat in the water, sometimes here in North Carolina and other times in the West Indies. Normally I varnish the bowsprit while anchored and standing in our hard dinghy Sweet Pea. We varnish the coamings under shade awnings. However, for this video, I'd removed the bowsprit and had it in my shop at home, so I could strip off years of varnish and paint and apply a new foundation. The two previous videos included some special modifications to the coamings and winch pads I made to make varnishing easier. The more difficult maintenance is to complete, the less likely you are to do it. I'm no different than anyone else in that regard. Last thing, I'm still learning and always interested in improving my varnish knowledge. So if you have some tips and techniques that work especially well for you, feel free to share them in the comment section. Last summer, I took the bowsprit off of the Far Reach, brought it home to the shop, and stripped years of varnish and paint off of it, and then reapplied new varnish and new paint. I thought I'd share some of the techniques and the tools that I use for the project. I make my own sanding blocks. These are made from marine grade plywood. They just happen to be offcuts I have in the shop. They're different thicknesses, just whatever I have on hand. And then I apply rubber that I bought from McMaster Carr for other projects still. And I just used 3M adhesive spray and stuck the rubber onto the marine grade plywood. And I use these as sanding blocks. And I like them because marine grade plywood is dead flat, it's not warped, it doesn't have voids in it, so it's just a real consistent surface. I get a hard side and a little bit softer side. If you cut them the right length with a standard 8.5 by 11 sheet of sandpaper, if you cut the blocks the right length, they fit just right. And so you can wrap the sandpaper around the block and use that. You can move the block across the paper as you're sanding and you use the whole paper. You don't waste any, which is often the problem when you use sand blocks like this that you get from the hardware store. You end up wasting an awful lot of sandpaper. It takes a long time to cut it and then put it in there and use it and peel it off. This is just really quick. A stack of these small sections of sandpaper in different grits. I just put them on here, sand away. When I've used it all, toss it. I've got another sheet. I just put it right on there and keep going, so it saves time. Save you some money too. I also use these soft blocks that come in different grits, and I don't really care so much about the grit. The grit wears off really quick, the abrasive. But I like them because it gives you just another tool for sanding. It's a little bit softer. It conforms a little bit better to something that's rounded, not dead flat. It's just it's a good additional tool for a regular hard sanding block. Fits the sandpaper just right. Here's one that's got a nice little angle on it, so when I'm sanding along the edge of the coaming and I need to get down right to the edge of the deck without abrading the deck at all, this works really well for sliding along the edge. Also for sanding, I have a variety of different putty knives and things that I use. I'll cut sandpaper in small strips and then wrap it around and work into those tight edges that I need to make sure I have the surface properly abraded. I've had the best results with foam brushes, and I have some badger hair brushes, but I haven't been able to produce reliable, consistent results with them. And I think part of the problem is those badger hair brushes hold a lot of varnish. They load up really well, and in the hands of somebody who's really experienced at varnishing and does it all the time, they can handle that much varnish. But for me, I don't varnish all the time, and though I'm pretty good at it, I think. The foam brushes work better for me because it forces me to put a little bit less varnish on the surface, so I maintain better control over it. It's better for me. I have better luck stroking the varnish out, less likely to have curtains and runs, and I just get better, more consistent results with foam brushes. These are made by Gin Manufacturing. I think they're the best brushes of the foam ones that I've used. They're the most consistent, and they seem to be a little bit more resistant to the solvents that you use with varnish. And I've also used these same foam brushes when we roll and tip all grip, and I've had really good luck with them. I have them in both 1 inch and 2 inch and 3 inch. Most of the ones that I go to are 2 inch. I have used them up to 4 inch when we were rolling and tipping the boat with all grip a couple years ago. And I buy them in boxes of 48. I purchased them from Defender or Jamestown distributors. And those hard to get to spaces, I've got a couple of different artist brushes that I use. And sometimes, you know, even a 1 inch, 2 inch brush, it's too big and you'll make a mess. So having a couple of smaller, thinner, easier to handle brushes for those real small little tight areas, a few of these kind of brushes can really help you out. The tape that I like to use is 3M Scotch 233 tape. It comes in different widths. I like it because it's solvent resistant, so when I lay it down on a piece of wood or on the deck of the boat and I've got to wipe down with acetone or denatured alcohol, mineral spirits, whatnot, the tape holds up real well and doesn't come apart. For cups, I just use plastic cups. I have them in different sizes depending on how much varnish I need to use. What I like about them is I just punch a hole in them and I cut these little pieces of rod and run them through so I can unload the brush before I apply it on the surface. And I have better control over how much varnish is on the brush. When I'm finished varnishing, I just pull this bar out, wipe it down, wipe the edge of the cup out, and if I cover it up with cling wrap, saran wrap, and then put the rubber band over the top of that, it protects the varnish. And as long as I'm varnishing every day, you know, each day I pull the cling wrap off, I put a little more varnish in here, a little bit more thinner, swirl it around to mix it. If I have to stir it, I'm going to stir it very slowly so that I don't induce any bubbles into it. As long as I'm using it every day, the varnish doesn't skim over. If I have it covered up though and I don't use it for a couple of days, then the varnish will skim over and you'll have to start over again. With regard to varnish, I use Epifanis Clear High Gloss Varnish. I've been using it for a long time, about 15 years. I've applied many, many gallons of it. And over the years, I've become familiar with how it works. I'm comfortable thinning it. I know how to apply it when it's warm out, when it's cooler out. I've used it with an accelerator in it with good results. So I know what it needs to give me the results that I'm looking for. And I think that's really the important thing, is that whatever varnish you use, is that you just become familiar with it and you learn how it works. And it's the same for paint and epoxy too. The thinner that I use, I've used the Epifanis, their thinner, and it's a very good thinner. It's expensive, and I use a lot of varnish, and I found that I get just as good results with this odorless mineral spirits that I get at Lowe's. This happens to be made by Jasco. I've used the Crown version as well, and it works just fine for me. So that's what I use. I have a smaller can that I decant it into that I like, that I store it in, but it's a lot less expensive if you buy it by the gallon like this, and you'll use a lot of thinner in the varnish. It's important to strain varnish, and the only time that I don't use a strainer when I'm decanting varnish from the can into the cups, if it's a brand new can and it's been unused, I'll pull the lid off of it and I'll just pour it directly into the dispensing cup. After I've opened it once though, I'm running it through these paper strainers to get out any crud that's dried up, any varnish that's dried up around the lid or anything like that. It's kind of a pain to do it, but you're not going to end up with debris, dust and grit and other stuff in your varnish, which will ruin your finish. The book that I've used to really help me learn how to varnish is called Bright Work, The Art of Finishing Wood by Rebecca Whitman. She was a professional for many years, and she did a great job with this book. It's got all kinds of information in it, and it's not just about varnishing. It's about preparing the wood, taping, restoring old wood and bringing it up to standard so that you can finish it properly. There's varnishing, oiling. There's information on here about different kinds of brushes and thinners and accelerators and how to strip old varnish and finishes off of wood with a heat gun and scraper, which you'll see we're going to do in today's episode. My copy was published in 1990. It's well used, dog-eared, and it's all marked up and got notes in it. I think it's out of print, but you can find it in a used bookstore. And if you're serious about becoming competent at varnishing, other than just applying a lot of varnish, this is a really good tool to help you out. On closer examination, the varnish is in really good shape, as you can tell. I may not need to strip it. This is one little area, something got caught under here. I can't remember what it was. I'll take a close look at that. This is a pad that I installed over a piece of leather and dolphinite for the anchor to rub against when it's up on the rollers. And this is my own design right here. This is a 1/4" G10 pad, and you can see it's proud of the bowsprit. That sits in the gammon iron, so even if it touches the gammon iron, which it doesn't, it floats, water can't get up onto the wood, so the bowsprit is never in direct contact with the deck. And then in the back, it's the same. This piece of G10 it does come in contact with the heel cup, that bronze heel cup, but the wood does not. And then you can see I built relief into the back, so any water that gets in runs there to the back, and there's a little drain hole I drilled in the back of the heel cup to come out. And I just used enough caulk to keep water from getting in there. That's it. Caulking doesn't hold it in place. Compression holds it in place. You just use a heat gun, and the varnish just comes right off. If you tried to sand this varnish off, you just take off a lot of wood, and you probably change the shape of the wood as well. You always pull with a scraper when you're removing varnish. You never push. Varnish looks pretty good, but you can see there's a little split in it right here. The water got in there. Same back here. So I'll go ahead and remove all this varnish as well. And we'll start over. There's the chafing guards I built for the anchors, so that's a fiberglass molding that I made out of epoxy and biaxial, and then a piece of leather on top of that, and then just a piece of copper flashing to protect the leather. Sorry about the lawn noise over there. But you can see I took the copper flashing off. This is the leather. And underneath is a piece of fiberglass that I molded to support it. And if you'll notice, this is going to come off pretty easily. And the reason is I bedded it with dolphinite. Dolphinite is a non-permanent bedding compound. It's not really a adhesive at all. It's just a bedding compound, and it's soft, and then it sort of never like really fully hardens,
But anytime you want something with, bed something with wood that you ever think you're going to take apart, there's any chance you're going to take apart, dolphinite's a really great alternative to more traditional bedding compounds like polysulfide or polyurethane. I'd never use 4200 on something like this, or even polysulfide. I think dolphinite's just the way to go. Doesn't damage the wood when you take it off. You know you're going to take it off every once in a while to varnish underneath here, so that's a good choice. Also, it doesn't harden. You know, you keep it in a can, and you can use it whenever you need it. So that's sort of an old school bedding compound. We'll sand it, but only after all the varnish is gone. Removing varnish with sanding is very hard on the wood, and it's really a last resort kind of approach. You can also get in these really tight spots. If it gets too hot, you just turn the heat down away. Put it back on there. This is a card scraper. This is a very standard tool in the old days. It's not used so much anymore.
The first coat of varnish is applied very thin. It's mixed 50-50. 1 part varnish to 1 part mineral spirits. It's applied over the whole bowsprit, and it serves as a sealer coat underneath the forward round part of the bowsprit, which is going to get follow-on coats of varnish, as well as a sealer under the square aft part of the bowsprit, which is going to get 3 coats of white paint.
You can see all the spots you can't get with a hard block. I built this bowsprit with a draw knife and spoke shave, so it's not perfectly smooth all around with a machined. Then go over it with a soft block. To get into these other places, you sometimes have to resort to hand. I don't really like doing this because you can make the surface more uneven. But if you just gently work this maroon pad, which is about the same as 320 abrasive, you can typically get a little scratching in all these shiny spots. You know you've sanded it when you don't have any shiny spots left. So this is after sanding some more, and you can see there's almost no shiny spots. Pretty much abraded all the surface to be varnished.
Let's pause for a minute and talk about sanding. You're going to come across those who are adamant that final coats of varnish should be applied over a surface sanded with 320 or even 440 for that perfect high gloss glass finish. Well, that's fine for interior varnish. For exterior wood, I have a different perspective. The Far Reach isn't a princess. She's a voyaging boat, an athlete. The primary purpose of varnish is to protect the wood, so I want it to be as tough as possible. When I apply the first base coat thin 50-50, I'm laying it on bare wood sanded with 180 grit, so there's a grippy surface for the varnish to adhere to. After that, all subsequent sanding is done with 220. Varnish needs a well-scratched surface to adhere to. If you use too fine a sandpaper, then there isn't as much tooth in the surface for the next layer of varnish. There are no shortcuts when it comes to a quality finish. You have to sand between every coat, not only to eliminate errors under the subsequent coats that call attention to themselves, but to ensure the best possible adhesion in the unforgiving environment of the tropics or extreme temperature changes of higher latitudes. The other essential requirement to achieve a good finish are maintenance coats. I apply a minimum of 2 coats of varnish at a time, sanding between each coat to the coamings and the bowsprit usually every 4 months, unless the boat's under her cover. Once varnish has a break in the surface due to prolonged UV or contact damage, water will find a way in. Patching is difficult and almost always unsightly. Eventually, stripping and starting over is about the only viable option. The best advice I ever heard about varnishing is to only varnish what you're willing to maintain. All of our exterior teak is left bare for that very reason.
Sometimes you can varnish on across the grain like this and then stroke it out. And then you always tip back toward what you varnished. Very light for that last stroke. Light as a feather. You can see these little black holes in there. There's a little bit of water damage there. And that's where I put those chafing guards on to protect the wood from the spade anchor. And it's why I really don't like drilling any holes in something like this. Sometimes it's just a compromise. Those holes can be drilled out and plugged. I'm just not ready to do it yet. Maybe next time. Water always finds a way in. You have to work quick because you don't want to leave any brush marks as the varnish dries. Now tipping back towards where I started. Always looking for holidays, little areas that you miss. That's why light, having decent light is so important. One of the things to remember about varnish, especially on exterior wood, is you're never going to get a perfect coat, and it doesn't matter because you're going to get a chance a few months later to redo it. So get that protection on is what you're primarily focused on, is protecting the wood. Right there you can see there's a little holiday. No worries. Catch it tomorrow on the next coat. No curtains. Pretty good coverage. This is coat 6. Really needs 8 or 10 before I put it back on the boat. I'll probably get 8 on there. Then a couple of more in the spring before we launch.
Here's another way to do it. You have a round surface. You typically want to avoid using your fingers as the backing pad. It'll make uneven spots in the surface of the wood. Generally go with the grain. I do a mineral spirits wipe down. After I vacuum the floor and all the surrounding areas near where I'm going to varnish. I'll vacuum myself. If I'm doing interior varnish, I'll change my clothes, vacuum my hat, and not wear a hat.
And before I do the final varnish here, in about 10 minutes, I'll do another very light wipe down on a clean cloth with just a few drops of mineral spirits on it, like a tack rag. Tack rag works great too if you got one. First coat of white. That's bright side, Interlux bright side. What I'm doing now is I'm installing chafing guards on the bowsprit to protect the wood, the varnish and the wood from the anchor. So when I originally built the bowsprit, I had to determine where there was going to be chafe, and I got a little bit of scarring on the bowsprit, so I cut just a leather patch. I contact cemented it on here, and I used bronze tacks to put it on here, and it lasted a season. And I noticed right away, water was getting under it, and there was water damage into the wood. So I came back and I put wood plugs in those, and I decided to make one with a more molded, protected one. So I put packing tape on here, plastic clear packing tape, and I put biaxial on there, and I molded it to fit. And then I trimmed it down, and I contact cemented this piece of leather onto there. And it's 5-6 years old now. It's got 11,000 offshore miles on it. It's pretty good shape. And I cut copper flashing. This is roofing flashing. I just cut it with a pair of tin snips. And I'm not going to contact cement the copper onto the leather this time like I did last time. I'm going to use dolphinite to bed the epoxy chafing guard to the bowsprit, and then I'll put some more dolphinite on top. And dolphinite is a traditional bedding compound. It doesn't get hard, and there's no adhesive in it. It's easy to clean up. It's not quite as effective as polysulfide or polyurethane, but it's also easy to clean up. So when I need to strip and revarnish the bowsprit, you don't have caulking and all that stuff on there. So I just use dolphinite on it. And then I just cut this new piece of flashing. The other one was pretty beat up, so I just took it off. And then this is all shaped, and that'll just go on there this way, and I'll tape it off. I'll put some dolphinite on there and tighten down the fasteners, and we'll be good to go. There's the chafing guard installed. Lower one for the anchor. Bedded with dolphinite. And here's what the dolphinite looks like. You can tell it's kind of soft, thick. It doesn't ever really harden, or maybe it takes like 10 years or so. It's not something I would bed hardware with that was going to be on there for decades. Butyl is good if you've got nuts on the other end pulling it tight. But if you ever want to take it apart, if it's wood, especially if it's wood on wood or something like that, where you're going to take it apart every so many years, like I do these, like the wood cleats that I install on my combings, I take those off every time I varnish. So dolphinite's perfect for that.
If you enjoyed this episode of Far Reach Voyages, let us know in the comments. Also, consider liking and subscribing, as it tells us you would like to see more videos, and it helps the channel grow. See you in the next episode.
For tape, I blah, 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 let's try again. Varnish like paint and epoxy. Oh man, I really messed this up. Let's try again. Man, I am messed up, aren't I? Take 45.